This is a homily for the Solemnity of the Most Holy Trinity. The first reading is from the book of Proverbs, chapter 8, verses 22 to 31. The second reading is from the letter of St. Paul to the Romans, chapter 5, verses 1 to 5. The Gospel for this Sunday comes from the Gospel of St. John, chapter 16, verses 12 to 15. To download the text of this homily as a PDF file, go to sundayhomilies.au. The Easter season ended last Sunday with the Feast of Pentecost. We are now back in what the Church's liturgical calendar calls ordinary time, although for this Sunday and the following 2 Sundays we'll be celebrating special feast days. The Holy Trinity this week, Corpus Christi, or the body and blood of Christ, next week, and then the feast day of Saints Peter and Paul. Reflecting upon the great feasts of our Christian faith, the birth, death, resurrection, and ascension of the Lord, and the descent of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost, theologian Hans Urs von Balthasar says this: Today's feast, the Holy Trinity, joins the others not as the recalling of some particular recondite mystery that needs to be brought to mind once a year, but as the sum of them all: Christmas, Good Friday, Easter, Ascension, Pentecost, finally allowing us to see together in a unity what up to now we saw as a colourful spectrum of broken light. On the Feast of the Holy Trinity, we wrestle with the paradox. God is one, and yet God is revealed to us as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Polish philosopher Leszek Kolakowski reminds us that God is something that cannot be and, at the same time, has to be spoken of. No logical devices will make this tension vanish. We must, however, be aware of the perennial temptation to reduce God to a problem that can be solved, to a concept that can be neatly packaged and labelled. The 14th century Dominican theologian Meister Eckhart wrote that the greatest leave-taking is leaving God for God. The path to maturity as a human being demands that we leave behind many things that, as children, we thought were true. But the greatest leave-taking of all is to let go of images and understandings of God, spelt with a lowercase g, so that we can journey towards God with a capital G. Another Dominican theologian, Herbert McCabe, once wrote that when we speak of God, we do not clear up a puzzle, we draw attention to a mystery. The etymology of the word mystery is instructive. The English word mystery comes from the Greek word mysterion. The first part of the word, mu, comes from the Greek verb muo, which means to shut, and it refers especially to shutting the mouth or the eyes. The suffix terion means a place where something happens. It's not unlike our English suffix ium. So, for example, an auditorium is literally a place for hearing. A gymnasium is a place for exercise. A podium is a place where you stand. So mysterion means literally a place of silence, or a place where we are rendered speechless. Mystery, in other words, transcends the explanatory power of words. In the words of the 4th century hymn from the liturgy of St. James, "Let all mortal flesh keep silence." British biologist and science writer Colin Tudge writes that all humanity, including scientists, have to learn to live with mystery, and with mystery should come humility. The Christian philosopher and apologist St. Justin Martyr wrote, "God so surpasses our powers of description that no one can really give a name to him. Anyone who dares to say that he can must be hopelessly insane." We need to remind ourselves that God is ultimately unknowable. In the words of St. Augustine, "Si enim comprehendis, non est Deus." If you have understood, then what you have understood is not God. The great Dominican theologian St. Thomas Aquinas said much the same when he wrote, "Quidquid potest intelligere vel cogitare, minus est ipso Deo." Whatever can be known or understood is less than God himself. In his work De Veritate he writes, "The essence of God himself remains forever hidden from us. The most we can know of God during our present life is that he transcends everything that we can conceive of him." The 17th century Flemish artist Peter Paul Rubens painted a scene that came from a legendary story about St. Augustine. While walking along a beach, Augustine came across a young boy who had dug a hole in the sand. He was running back and forth between the sea and the hole that he had dug, carrying a small bucket and pouring seawater into the hole. Augustine asked, "What are you doing?" The boy explained, "I'm emptying the ocean into this hole." Augustine, somewhat taken aback, replied, "You'll never empty the ocean into that hole, even if you keep running back and forth for the next 1,000 years. The sea is so vast, and your hole is so small." According to the legend, the boy replied, "I have as much of a chance of doing this as you have of explaining the vast mystery of the Holy Trinity." We even need to be wary when we speak of God's existence. In The Matter with Things, psychiatrist Ian McGilchrist reminds us that God is above all not a thing alongside other things, even one equipped with ultra-special powers. God simply is, in the use of the verb that requires that we understand God both to have being and to be the ground of being at one and the same time. When it comes to explaining the mysteries of our faith, especially the mystery of the Holy Trinity, the words of T.S. Eliot from Four Quartets are apposite. Words strain, crack, and sometimes break under the burden. Under the tension, slip, slide, perish, decay with imprecision, will not stay in place, will not stay still. Ian McGilchrist tells us that nothing is less true than that we understand something only when we express it in language. On the contrary, language at times places a barrier between us and understanding, substitutes a crabbed expression for a living reality, and pretends to explain it away. The difficulty lies not in finding the right words, the difficulty lies in there being no right words. British philosopher Brian McGee expresses the same thought in these words: "The assumption that everything of significance that can be experienced or known or communicated is capable of being uttered in words would be too preposterous to merit a moment's entertainment, were it not for the fact that it has underlain so much philosophy in the 20th century." St. Anselm of Canterbury once offered this succinct definition of theology: Fides querens intellectum. Faith seeking understanding. Note that belief comes first. We believe and then we seek to understand what it is that we believe. Writing centuries earlier, St. Augustine said, Ergor noli quaerere intelligere ut credas, sed credas ut intelligas. Therefore seek not to understand so that you may believe, but believe that you may understand. To illustrate what Augustine is getting at here, take a look at these two photographs of the south rose window of Chartres Cathedral in France. These magnificent windows are over 800 years old. One photograph is taken from the outside of the cathedral and the other from inside. If you want to experience the beauty of these stained glass windows, you can't do it by standing outside. From the outside they appear drab, colourless and lifeless. By way of analogy, viewing the windows from outside is equivalent to wanting to understand before believing. However, once you enter the cathedral, once you enter the household of faith, the drab and colourless windows suddenly appear a brilliant festival of colour and light. Entering the cathedral is analogous to believing. It is only then that the beauty of the windows is revealed. Our quest for God always involves a tug of war. It's a tug of war between the transcendence and the immanence of God. God is transcendent. God cannot be captured in any human words or images, as we've seen. As St. Thomas has told us, God transcends everything that we can conceive of him. But God is also immanent. By the way, don't confuse two similar sounding English words, immanent spelt with an I and imminent spelt with an A. Imminent with the I means that something is about to happen. Immanent with the A means indwelling or existing within. It comes from the Latin in and manere, which means to stay or remain. So immanent refers to God's indwelling. In other words, God dwells among us and chooses to reveal himself to us. Jesus is the divine Word made flesh, the divine Word who dwelt among us and who promised the Spirit of truth who will lead us to the complete truth. Transcendence refers to God's total and utter otherness. Immanence refers to God's intimate and personal presence. In the prologue to John's Gospel we read that the Word became flesh and lived among us. A literal translation of that verse is, the Word became flesh and pitched his tent among us. The Greek verb translated as lived is eskenosen. The Greek verb used here, skenoo, means to dwell in a tent. Just as God dwelt among his people in the tent of meeting during the Exodus from Egypt, in the Incarnation, God, in the person of Jesus, pitches his tent, or becomes flesh, and dwells among us. The transcendent God remains hidden. The immanent God chooses to reveal himself. Let's now turn to today's first reading from the book of Proverbs. God's wisdom is personified. The Hebrew word for wisdom is chokmah, and in Greek it is sophia. In both languages the noun is feminine, so Lady Wisdom addresses us. When he, that is God, fixed the foundations of the earth, I was with him as a confidant. So wisdom is God's intimate companion as he creates the world. In the 4th century, the Roman Emperor Constantine moved the capital of the empire from Rome to a small village named Byzantium, which he renamed after himself, Constantine's city, or Constantinople. The great Cathedral Church of Constantinople, the city we now know as Istanbul, was named after God's holy wisdom, Hagia Sophia in Greek. The present church was built by the Roman Emperor Justinian between 532 and 537, and remained the cathedral church of the city for over 900 years, until it fell to the Ottoman Turks in 1453. It was then turned into a mosque and minarets were added. It remained a mosque until 1931, when it was turned into a museum. In 2020, it was reconverted into a mosque. Its official name as a cathedral was the Shrine of the Holy Wisdom of God. When we look at the universe, how do we interpret what we see? We can see the universe through the lens of naturalism or through the lens of creation. Naturalism is the belief that all that exists can be explained by matter in motion and the blind forces of nature. The alternative view is expressed in the book of Proverbs. God is the creator. When he fixed the foundations of the earth, I was with him as a confidant. In the first chapter of the letter to the Romans, St. Paul writes, "Ever since the creation of the world, what is invisible about God, his eternal power and divinity, has been glimpsed through the understanding of what he has made." Well, with that in mind, let us see what we can glimpse of God's wisdom as we look at nature. Francis Collins, a physician and geneticist, led the Human Genome Project as director of the National Human Genome Research Institute. Collins sees the precise tuning of physical constants in the universe as interesting pointers to God. He says that you can't look at that data and not marvel at it. It is astounding to see the knife edge of improbability upon which our existence exists. Notice that Collins uses the word pointers rather than proof. To understand what this is all about, I've been helped by the writings of the late John Polkinghorne. John was an ordained Anglican priest, but prior to that he was Professor of Mathematical Physics at the University of Cambridge. He says this: "When we think of the universe we live in, it is characterized by certain types of scientific laws and certain types of basic forces that go with those laws. For example, we live in a universe which has gravity in it. Not just any old gravity, but gravity of a particular type and a particular strength. We can play intellectual games and say, I wonder what the universe would be like and what its history would have been like if gravity had been a bit different, if it had been much stronger, or even a little bit weaker than it is. Well, let's have a closer look at our fine-tuned universe. Polkinghorne mentions gravity. So let's see what would happen if gravity were a little stronger or a little weaker than it now is. If the force of gravity varied from its actual value by just 1 part in 10 to the 60th, then life could not exist. That is a 1 with 60 zeros after it. After the Big Bang, if the force of gravity were slightly stronger, matter would collapse back on itself. The Big Bang would have been followed by the Big Crunch. If, after the Big Bang, the force of gravity were slightly weaker, matter would spread so thinly that no stars, planets, or galaxies could form. How does the force of gravity affect life on planet Earth? If Earth were slightly larger, it would have slightly more gravity. If Earth had just a little bit more gravity than it now has, methane and ammonia gas, which have molecular weights of 16 and 17 respectively, would remain close to our surface. Since we cannot breathe methane or ammonia, which are toxic, we would die. But if Earth were a tiny bit smaller and had a bit less gravity, water vapour, which has a molecular weight of 18, would not stay down here close to the planet's surface, but would instead dissipate into the atmosphere. Without water, we couldn't exist. So these universal constants, one of which is gravity, have been calibrated to an astonishingly precise value, a value that falls within an exceedingly narrow, life-permitting range. If any one of these constants were altered even by a hair's breadth, no life of any kind could exist anywhere. Sir Fred Hoyle, one of the most influential physicists of the 20th century, made this observation. It is no more likely that our world has evolved out of chaos than that a hurricane blowing through a junkyard should create a Boeing. The Canadian philosopher John Leslie writes about what is known as the anthropic principle in his book Universes. The anthropic principle deals with what is needed to make a world in which human beings can live. Is it possible that life occurred randomly by chance? Leslie responds to this question with an example. Imagine that you are about to be executed by firing squad. 12 highly trained sharpshooters have their rifles levelled at your heart. They each take aim and fire. The shots ring out. But you survive. Not a single bullet has hit you. What do you conclude from that? Do you just shrug your shoulders and say, well, that's just the way it is. No need to seek an explanation. But as human beings, we're hardwired to seek an explanation. Perhaps every one of the executioners was very tired and weary after a long day of executions, and just by luck, by pure chance, you happen to be the one person at whom they all aim, but all 12 miss. Or, alternatively, the sharpshooters are on your side, and they missed by choice. Which option offers the most coherent explanation of our finely tuned universe? Something coming out of nothing and randomly over billions of years, ending up with people like us. Or a divine creator whose holy wisdom permeates all that is and makes it possible. If the fine-tuning of our universe makes life possible and evokes awe, what do we make of the information present in even the simplest of living cells? Here we have another pointer to the wisdom of God that permeates all of creation: DNA. Every part of us is built from this blueprint called DNA. Its famous spiralling helix was identified by Francis Crick and James Watson in the 1950s. It contains the microscopic building blocks of life, vastly long sequences of code written in 4 base letters, A, C, G, and T. These long sequences are coiled so tightly that each cell contains 2 meters of code. If you unravelled it all, the DNA in an average human body would stretch around the entire solar system twice. In his book, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, Justin Brierley offers this explanation. In popular culture, most people assume that Darwin's theory explains all this complexity. There are numerous reasons why, in fact, Darwin's original theory is increasingly contested in academic circles. But its most glaring limitation is that it cannot explain where life came from in the first place. To have a process of biological evolution at all requires a self-replicating DNA molecule for it to go to work on. Where did the source code originate? The complexity of DNA leaves us in awe, but a far more confounding question is, how did life emerge in the first place? Eminent physicist Paul Davies puts it this way. Darwin gave us a theory of evolution about how life has evolved over billions of years from simple microbes to the complexity of the biosphere we see today. But he didn't want to tangle with how you go from non-life to life. And for me, that's a much bigger step. The transition from the earliest microbes to what we see today is an enormous amount of complexification. But it's got nothing on that first step of going from a mishmash of chemicals to the first living thing. Because almost all the complexity in the biosphere is in the individual organisms, not in the subsequent ecology and everything else. Oxford professor Alistair McGrath had been an atheist in his younger years, but he became a Christian while studying biochemistry at Oxford University. He says this about his conversion. What drew me to faith initially was this very deep sense that it made much more sense of the world and my experience than anything else. Certainly much more sense than atheism. Faith makes sense in itself, but it makes sense of everything else as well. On this feast of the Holy Trinity, we worship God who, in the words of today's first reading, created the earth, the countryside, and the first grains of the world's dust. He fixed fast the springs of the deep and assigned the sea its boundaries. But God is not only creator of the world, God is also redeemer of the world. Let us now turn to St. Paul's letter to the Romans. In today's second reading, St. Paul writes, "Through our Lord Jesus Christ, by faith we are judged righteous and at peace with God." What does it mean to be judged righteous? Judged righteous is the translation of the Jerusalem Bible, but the New Revised Jerusalem Bible, the New Revised Standard Version, and the New American Bible all prefer the word justified. The Greek verb that Paul uses is dikaio. The noun is dikaiosune. The Hebrew equivalent is tzedakah. This brings us to the Greek word group dikaios, dikaiosune, dikaiosis, and dikaio. The adjective dikaios means righteous or just. The noun dikaiosune can be translated as righteousness or justice. The noun dikaiosis means righteousness or justification. And the verb dikaio means to justify or pronounce righteous. These four words are used 211 times in the New Testament. The underlying meaning of this word group has to do with justification or righteousness. Perhaps the English word rectification is closer to the mark. Rectification in the literal sense of making right or setting aright. Fleming Rutledge offers this explanation. To our contemporary ears, righteousness is a stuffy word, connoting adherence to a set of moral codes or strictures. The meaning of the word righteousness in Hebrew, however, is a world away from our idea of legalism or moralism. When we read in the Old Testament that God is just and righteous, this doesn't refer to a threatening, abstract quality that God has over against us. It is much more like a verb than a noun, because it refers to the power of God to make right what has been wrong. The Trinity, our belief in God's presence as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, is indeed a mystery, a place where words fall silent. However, our transcendent God has chosen to reveal himself as both Creator and Redeemer. And so our hearts are filled with wonder, awe, enchantment, astonishment, delight, and joy.